Greetings and salutations, everyone. Today begins the first of a series of lectures about the River Valley civilizations. And we're going to start with the oldest one, the one that is probably overlooked the most despite the tremendous, rich cultural, political, social impact that it has. Mesopotamia. This is the cradle of civilization. This is the benchmark to which we still categorize so many trends. So let's get started. The highlighted region here is generally referred to as the Fertile Crescent. It is called this because, number one, it is highly fertile. The land here is really, 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 really good. And it's the crescent because, it's shaped kind of like a crescent. The region here that is the staple crop that we see, the staple thing that's going to be grown in this region is going to be barley. It's in the wheat family. Now, the great thing about barley is that it grows really easy. It can last, if it's preserved, an entire season. You can do a lot with it, but the downside is it's not always the most stable of crops. It's very temperamental when it comes to, too much heat, too much water, not enough of either of those things. And the people of Mesopotamia realized very quickly that this cereal crop, this crop that could be used to make breads and kind of burnt bread, and that might not sound great, but that is the only way of preserving bread, except for beer, the way that you make just liquid bread. Aside from this crop, we see a lot of fishing still used because, you're in the Persian Gulf, you're on two very big river systems. No reason not to use that as a natural resource. And this is all going to be kicking off around the 3rd to 4th millennia. And as far as domestication of animals go, we see that camels and horses are going to join donkeys by about the 2nd millennia BCE. These each are going to have their own place in the domesticated beast. Over time, cities are going to start to pop up. Actually, they're going to be proto-villages are going to start popping up around more and more fertile places around the rivers. This is because the ground is good, the water is clean, you can eat, drink, and enjoy both without necessarily a lot of problems. And as those cities start growing, villages start growing bigger, they become cities, and eventually they're going to become a city-state. Now, a city-state is a city-sized territory and the area around it, but it operates like it's its own state, and by that I mean like nation state in some instances. Some of the different city-states that we see in history are going to have different forms of money, different kinds of government, different kinds of language or religion, and in some cases they're all really close. And these cities are going to continue to grow until the Sumerians show up. And they are ridiculously significant. Sorry to pass this, but I really need to talk about the idea of flooding. The pros of it are that it's going to bring in the good water, the good dirt. The cons of it is it's unpredictable, especially in Mesopotamia. You have yourselves situated near the water because carrying water sucks. To anyone who carries a gallon jug of water with them every day with the idea of, well, if I need to finish this before the end of the day, that stinks. But if you're carrying 5, 7, 10 gallons and you're carrying that to a farm and you need to get more for yourself, you're going to spend all day going back and forth to get water. So you might put your house or your village or your city-state near the river. And that's obviously not the best thing to do because if it floods, you are almost certainly going to die. The low rain that we see in this region means that farmers and, well, heck, anybody is going to want better irrigation systems, better ways of moving water from A to B. And you can cut a canal and that works. You can see an invention like a shadoof. That's what's going on in this picture. It's basically a bucket attached to a counterweight that you can use to fill up and then give yourself water. Real practical things, and the more you use them, the better they are. Are located out of the city-state Summer. Just going to reference this long enough to mention that. And ultimately, they fall because of the Akkadians. The Akkadian Empire was ruled over by a man named Sargon, and that is his death mask that is in that picture right there. The unique thing about the Akkadians wasn't necessarily that they came and conquered, it was how they came and conquered. The Akkadians used chariots, and this was unprecedented in the region. The Sumerians were devastated by this, decimated by this. They were totally put to shame by Sargon's vastly superior military skills and tactics. And after Sargon defeats Summer and creates this and conquers the region, he extends his own city-state's borders to incorporate the defeated Sumerians. In doing this, he has created the first empire, a large region characterized by many different peoples, ruled over typically by one person. So when we look back at firsts, this is the first example of empire building that we see. But it's also the first instance of massive slavery that we see. Slavery in ancient and classical and early modern and most of human history wasn't based on race, religion, national idea, national entity exclusively. It was typically based on you were beaten in war. Your city-state was defeated, and this is tribute that has to be paid to the people who conquered you. Almost exclusively, this slavery is for just you. It doesn't matter if you have children. Slave status almost never passed from parent to child in a chattel manner. That's something that we'll see much later in human history, but just be cognizant that slavery is a component of human society, even in the earliest days of human society. The economic system that's most prevalent throughout Mesopotamia was called barter system. The idea of barter is that you are trading goods or money or services for goods or money or services. The big problem that barter trade has is that those things are worth different things to different people. After I've eaten, if somebody offers me more food, I'm probably not necessarily going to say yes, and here's a lot of money for more food. But if I'm, haven't eaten yet, or if I'm at the grocery store, I'm shopping for my sundries, I might pick something up that I normally wouldn't get just because I'm hungry, and there it is. The positive side of barter trade is that it can be used across a much broader spectrum of trade, not just here is X number of dollars for Y number of goods. Cat ran across the keyboard there. And each one of these gods had their own principal temple. In some cases, each city had a principal god that they worshipped, even though there was the pantheon of other gods that were present. Mesopotamian temples were called ziggurats, and this is a picture of it. The top picture is the recreation artistically, the bottom one is the more architecturally sound one, and these were giant structures that we see that were open actually to relatively few people. Unlike modern church based systems, you didn't just go there whenever services were held. And it also wasn't for everyone. It was usually almost exclusively for the priest class, who, in a lot of early Mesopotamian city states, were also the rulers. Now, even though you couldn't go to the big ziggurat, people usually had a small personal shrine. Um, these shrines usually were gave offerings or an icon or a fetish to the god you needed to worship, maybe the god of your household, or if you're a stone cutter, it's the god of the stone cutters. If you were a blacksmith, it's the god of the forge, that kind of thing. And when the festivals came around, when religious festivals came around, it's a party. It's a big deal. And from the depths of the ziggurat, usually the priest class would bring out holy relics from their mythology, from their faith, and they were kind of presented to the people. In some cases, there was a treasure chest, imagine, and the priest would say, in this treasure chest is the heart of the demon Tiamat, and everyone would, ooh and ah, and then the treasure chest goes back into the ziggurat, and no one ever opens it, but it is still a reason to get together, and like they say, any reason for a party. What you're seeing is an example of the first written language. It is called cuneiform, and it means wedge-shaped indentions, wedge-shaped etchings, and that's what this is. These are done not on paper or stone, but they're done on clay, and then the clay hardens, and voila, you've got a cuneiform. Cuneiforms were a lot like a receipt. Most of what we've found that are cuneiforms are receipts. Steve got X number of goats from me for X number of pounds of fish. And that was really an important way to keep track of your stuff, especially in a time that didn't have many other things. But this component is really important. Now, cuneiforms were not big. I mean, this picture is kind of weirdly sized, but most cuneiform tablets that we have found could fit in the palm of your hand. And that's kind of the norm. But we also have verbal languages that start to come out of this region as well. The Semites, who settle in the region around 2900 BCE, are going to establish the Semitic language umbrella, and that is going to give us Yiddish and Hebrew and a lot of those language groups that are still spoken today. The Mesopotamian education system used a base 12 counting system. This was a really significant idea to their world, as well as how they could visibly understand and decide the universe. And 12, we have base 10 in the West, and 12, you might think that's a kind of an odd number, 1 or 2 or 5, 0, 10, but for the Mesopotamians, this made a lot of sense, and it still exists today. There's 12 signs of the zodiac, 12 months in the year, 24 hours in a day, which is, a multiple of 12, 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour. The trend just continues. They had astronomy, they had chemistry. These were not Stone Age fools just banging rocks together. They really understood the broader idea of the world they lived in. When it came to contributions, aside from the political contribution of the empire, we also see the first real set of laws. And the best example of this was Hammurabi's Code. It was written sometime around 1780, and this picture is the laws. It was etched on this massive piece of stone, we call it a stele, and it lists the 282 laws. It was in the center of town where everyone can see it, and the laws were written in such a way that it outlined what the crime was and what the punishment was. So this the most popular lines in it are an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a life for a life. But there's also classism that's built into this as well, where it says if you are a rich man and you knock out the eye of a poor man, you only have to pay a small fine. Where, that's kind of biased, but, legal bias being what it is, that's not really a big surprise. Some of these laws even dictate the job you do, like construction is the example that's given there. If you build a house and the house falls down and kills somebody inside, then the state will put you to death. And that seems, kind of intense by today's standards, but it also set the standard very high that you were accountable for the things you did and create. And you better bet that construction workers knew when they put up a house it was going to stay up. The final thing I want to touch on today is the Epic of Gilgamesh. This is the oldest piece of literature that exists in the history of mankind. It is a story, and it's a story that has a little bit of everything going on in it. It is a grand story of a king called Gilgamesh who goes on kind of, I call it a road trip, and it's kind of a fun way to think of it, with a friend, and there's monsters and a quest to become immortal, and then a flood that wipes out over the whole world, and it's really fascinating. And there's a lot of the tones and themes that are going to pop up again and again in the rest of human culture and literature. And that's all we've got. I hope you've enjoyed today's lesson on Mesopotamia. I'll see you around.